Welcome to We Thought Song. Today I have as my guest Dr. Vonda Wright. Vonda, how are you doing today?
I've had a fabulous day, thanks.
Thank you for being here. I'm very grateful. You're a very busy woman. So I'm very grateful that we have you here today. What we want to talk about today is this concept of aging and the concept of longevity and your experience, the things that you've seen in your practice over the years of experience you have on how should we be observing ourselves as we grow older. But before we jump into that, we'll take a couple of minutes just to give you quick background. There's plenty of videos of you out there, and they're all going to be listed on the footnotes of the podcast. But just a quick background on how did you get to this point in your career? Where did you start, and how did you get to what you do today?
I think it's going to take more than 2 minutes. I've been working a very long time. So, I started my career in medicine as a cancer nurse in the 1990s at a time when we weren't quite as good at curing cancer as we are, although we still have a long way to go. So at that time, all cancer care was done in the hospital. So, for instance, if you were being treated over a 6-month period, you would actually come be admitted in the hospital for a full week. And at that time, it was a model of nursing called primary nursing. So you would come in once a week, once a month, for a week, for 6 months. I would always be your nurse. So you can imagine the deep therapeutic relationships that happen when someone is taking care of you through some of the most terrible, enriching, struggling times of your life, right? So imagine I'm 23 years old, I'm fresh out of college, I just have a fresh graduate school certificate, because at that time there was such a shortage of nurses that if you came out of a reputable place with a reputable degree, in 3 years you could get another bachelor's degree and a master's degree in nursing, which is what I did. So there I am, with all my fresh degrees, very little life experience at 23, taking care of people in the throes of their lives. So I set up my medical career like that, and we were observing my orthopedic practice, and then I'm a whole person orthopedic surgeon, and I care for people not as a number, but as a person in pain, which is a very different approach, right? That comes from being a 23-year-old at the bedside of dying people, because that can't help but change your life or change your perspective, such that I tease people and say, when I bought this house on Lake Nona that I bought, one of only 6 available in the week that I needed to buy a house because we are growing so fast here. I'm like, okay, I'll take that one. Well, I didn't change the curtains. I didn't change anything. It's the last lady's house because frankly, number one, it was fine. She was very nice. But frankly, yes, right? She did a good job. But when you're 23 years old and taking care of
people who know the priority in life, which is not curtains, that brushes off on you. So that's the perspective I've carried through my entire career. But after the first 6 years, during which time I was elevated from staff nurse to helping run the Rush Cancer Institute and a lab of 50 people, I decided what was my next step, right? So I could have gone into business. At that point, cancer care was being pushed to the outside. I could have gone straight into the PhD route and just done great research the rest of my life. But I know myself, and I knew that I needed to do great research and I needed to care for people. So I went back to medical school at 28. Which is very geriatric for medical school. Although there was a guy in my class who was 42. I don't know what got into his head, but he was there, 42, medical school. And then when I was done, I chose the longest possible path besides cardiothoracic surgery, which is orthopedic surgery. So 11 years later, I emerge, having spent my youth there. But all of that colors my perspective. So I get there and I'm at a fortunate to be an incredible academic center, University of Pittsburgh. And in choosing my research path, I don't know, am I going to be another ACL researcher figuring out where to put this one ligament in a very tiny space? Or I looked around and I was also impacted in my life by the fact that my father, who lives with us in Lake Nona, my parents live with us here, who's now 85, had been a lifelong athlete an endurance athlete. He'd been running marathons my whole life. And as he aged, and as I observed these races, there were these anomalies that popped up like, oh, what's that 63-year-old doing running a race? Which now it's commonplace. 60 is not even old. But at the time I was growing up in the 70s, you're like, what's Millie Hartung, 63, doing running a... So I had that perspective that aging didn't have to be an inevitable decline from the vitality of youth. We're all familiar with that, down some slippery slope to frailty, which is what happens when we age unintentionally and we let gravity and physics and time and inattention take over. What I saw in those anomalies, like my father, Millie Hartung, a guy named Banana George Blair, who at 93 was a slalom skier right here in Florida, what I saw was the potential of human capacities. So I set out to research that. So all of my original research is in musculoskeletal aging because I did not believe this myth. But why do we think that? Why do we think that aging is an inevitable decline? Well, most of the studies on aging that are done, this is like the Health ABC is a very large NIH-funded study that took a cohort of 70-year-olds and just followed them for a decade to see what happens. Well, most studies, population studies that we find show that aging is miserable. You decline into decrepitude. But let's observe something. You're a scientist. What do we observe about the general population? Not Lake Nona, but the general population. We are a special place here, and that's why I moved here. In the general population, 70% of people do no form of exercise any day of the week. They walk from their couch to their garage to their car, from the garage at work to their office and sit there for 10 hours. So when we study populations, we are studying sedentary living. So all my research was done on master's age athletes, many of them in the National Senior Games, asking questions. What would happen if we took the variable of sedentary living out? What is the capacity of a human being? And so we answered a bunch of questions. We answered the question, at what age do we really slow down? That's a surprising answer. We answered the questions like, can we preserve our bone density? We answered the question, can we preserve our lean muscle mass? And most importantly, a study that took us 5 years to do. It was one of the very, very early studies looking at the relationship between exercise and the brain. We documented that you can retain function of your brain with an intervention as simple as chronic exercise. And so that is the very, very long explanation of how we arrive here today with an orthopedic surgeon who's equally passionate about technology and doing surgery through needles and the amazing engineering that now goes on, as I am about changing the way we age in this country. Because I don't believe that myth, and I'm out to educate people and motivate them and show them that they have so much control over their aging process.
Well, that's wonderful. There's a lot there. I want to start zooming into some of it. I'm a fan of Dr. Gabor Mate. I don't know if you know, he's a trauma specialist. And he mentioned in one of his podcasts or interviews, he said something that really stuck with me. And I'd like to get your feedback on it. He said that the word normal is very misused because normal can be used very well in terms of how it mathematically means. And normal is basically what the majority of the data, where the majority of the data lies.
The norm. The mean.
Mean. But in society, we don't use it that way. We say it's normal to age the way that you describe. I mean, I'm 53 now, and I struggle with contemporaries of mine that say, well, it's over. I'm just on a decline now.
I need to talk to them.
They're right there. You need to talk to them. And it is because 70% of
Mm-hmm.
people are very sedentary.
Mhm.
So that is actually normal. But people take it not from a mathematical point of view as that's the norm, as no, this is just what happens. There is I have no diligence in changing this.
Mhm.
And I'm passionate as you are that no, I have, I am not a victim of my genes.
True. Yeah,
There is evidence on epigenetics and the regulation up and
that's
down
right.
of
Mhm.
genes. And someone else said, yes, the genes is the loaded gun, but the environment is the one that pulls the trigger.
Mhm.
So is that along the lines of what you've seen in your practice?
I think people would be surprised to learn that I passed a running group on the way walking over here from the LNPC, and I think people would be surprised to learn that one bout of aerobic exercise can change the expression of 9,800 genes, right? Whether you're sitting there and turning on the genes for dying or being up and active and turning on the genes for life. But I love the observation of what is normal, because normal sitting here could be very different than normal 10 miles down Narcoossee, because I think normal is what we observe and we assume that everybody is like us. But I contend to you that normal in Colorado Springs, Colorado is very different than normal in Kansas City. I'm from Kansas, right? Uh, and normal is what we perceive within our families. Sometimes it's horrible to see that we have 4 generations of illness and metabolic disease and obesity, and that's normal for that family because everyone a child sees around them is metabolically ill. And so maybe that is normal, but I think we have to be careful with the assigning of that word. And just because it's what you see does not mean that it is what is optimal or what is best. If we're talking, or what could be if we're talking about health, right?
So let's talk about you're a sports medicine
I am.
doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So you deal with a lot of people that are either professionals or are just regular people that are trying to be active.
That's right.
I'm gonna just throw this at you. Please keep me honest. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that we are born knowing how to move, right? As babies, we are born knowing how to move. I'm very passionate about not exercise. I'm passionate about movement,
Mobility. Mm-hmm. That's right.
right? And it seems to me that we're born knowing how to move. I have 3 kids. They're all adults now. But I remember where they were running around as toddlers. They were always with proper posture.
Mm-hmm.
Bend at the back. When they pick up something, they bend at the knees.
Mm-hmm.
Even when they cry, they know how to cry. They know how to push the air out the larynx without stressing their vocal cords, right? So they don't get hoarse. They'll scream for hours, right? And they don't get hoarse. I sing for 2 hours and my voice is gone, right? So along the line of growth, as we start going to school, pre-K, we're wearing tighter clothes. We're sitting more in the classroom, some people say the chair is the number 1 killer.
Yes.
We forget how to move, right? And that potentially leads to all kinds of problems. Do you agree with that?
So, if you look at the human body, I think nature is so smart, right? In the same way we describe certain architecture as form follows function, right? I think our bodies are masterfully made, right? And if we were intended to be sedentary beings, we would have been designed with a sessile stalk, with a wide base like a mushroom. Mushrooms aren't meant to go anywhere. They distribute their spores by opening up their hat and letting the wind carry that. So they're sessile. That is not the way humans were designed. Humans were designed with their strongest muscles below their belly buttons, which implies mobility. Otherwise, if we were meant to walk on our arms would be the strongest. No, we're designed that way. And so from the very instant that we're big enough in our mother's wombs, we're kicking around, right? And that continues today, even. I had a conversation about the fact that if I'm asking you to go take a walk after your major meal of the day so that your muscles will suck glucose out of your blood and make you metabolically more happy, I'm not asking you to do a new skill. You have known how to walk since you were 1 year old. So we can take any excuses of I don't know how to surf out of the equation because we all have walked since we're one. So I'm agreeing with your supposition that mobility may be one of the most natural things we do, not calculus and physics, people. Yeah.
I like that because I think that, I mean, for me, I've had a number of injuries, when I was younger and playing sports. And I remember, I have 5 screws and a metal plate on this ankle from a spiral fracture back in 2006. And I remember having to learn how to kick a soccer ball again.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to be very intentional to
Mm-hmm.
not do that in an appropriate way that was going to lead to bad habits and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we end up with society the way it is today, where we stick so much, right? We still, and then over time we start,
Mm-hmm.
doing this, and that has to have an effect. Because, like I said, I mean, we're talking earlier, I'm an engineer, so I think of force diagrams. Posture is
Mm-hmm.
important.
Mm-hmm.
The shoes we wear, how do we walk, where are our shoulders?
Mm-hmm.
But we're so busy and so occupied that seems to just go away and then lead to potential issues.
It does. Your sense is right. And I have a lot of people come to me and be hesitant to start because they don't want to get injured. And that's real. I mean, I've been injured, you've been injured, and pain is a real thing. We don't want it. But I ask people, where do they want to experience their pain? I'm going to tell you for sure, because I am still a practicing surgeon. Have to take call. I see people in pain who have neglected to take care of themselves and fall down from a standing position and break their hips. Hip fractures are in a large way preventable by mobility across a lifespan. So I say to people, choose your pain. You can choose to have the potential to sprain your ankle, maybe not get 5 plates and 10 screws, but hurt yourself by being active while you're maintaining your metabolic health. Or you can choose 20 years of dying of metabolic syndrome. I choose to live healthy, vital, active, joyful, with the potential of having an occasional injury that are also preventable. So I ask people to choose their pain. I also think that this is the way we are. There's nothing wrong with this, but it's the way we are. People live according to a max-min principle. I want the maximum benefit from the minimum effort. Well, I'm sorry, when we're talking about healthy, vital, active, joyful, it takes a certain amount of activation energy fed back into the system to optimize the system. Like, you're an engineer. I don't know a thing about engineering other than what I know is it takes energy to run a system. A machine is just not going to sit there unless we put the fuel into it. And that's the way I view mobility in caring for the human body.
Well, that's wonderful. And so let me ask you, so one of the things that you talk about a lot is this comparison between life expectancy and
Healthspan,
lifespan versus health span. It seems like more and more people are talking about it now. It wasn't something that was talked about back in the
Yes.
30 years ago.
Yes.
Do you think we're making headway in that space? Based on what you see from the people that come to see you, people understanding that there's gotta be a focus, not just on the number of years that we live, but on.
Let's put some numbers to this. So it's not an abstract idea, but what is the life expectancy now of people in this industrialized country, which, by the way, is lower life expectancy than in other countries in the world? Life expectancy is now 76.4 for men and 81 for women. If you live in Japan, it's upwards over 82, right? Because of lifestyle. So that's life expectancy, lifespan. What is our health span? Research has shown that the average health span, the time when you are not either diagnosed or feeling the effects of diagnoses you've carried across your life since you were 40, for instance, is 64. So, what are we doing for the last 20 years of our lives? Dying of diseases that we could have prevented and going to the doctors 3 times a week after you retire when you're supposed to be enjoying the fruits of your labor, right? So, when I put those numbers on health span versus life expectancy, sometimes it opens people's eyes like, oh my God, who wants to die for 20 years? Well, when do we start preparing or to extend our health span? Well, if you haven't done it before, I call 35 to 45 the critical decade to get your proverbial health shit together, because you're coming out of your graduate school, you're getting a little stable. Hopefully we're out of our parents' houses by then but it's time to start thinking about adulting, because what happens at 40? Well, for both men and women, our hormones begin to fluctuate profoundly. Now, to be specific, men's hormones are pretty stable throughout their lives, except testosterone starts to fluctuate in their 40s. And even men feel the effects of that. For women, there is a profound change that starts at 40 when we have 1% of our eggs left. We are born with 500,000 potential eggs, and every month we shed them, such that by age 40, we've only got 1% left, which doesn't churn out enough estrogen, and we begin to have the profound health changes that happen. So, when do we start changing the trajectory of our health? Well, if not before, we better start by the time we're 35. And so it's much earlier than people think it needs to be.
So when you talk about that and all the various things that people can do about
Yeah.
it, obviously there's a triage, right, of good sleep, the good quality and quantity of sleep, nutrition, and of course exercise. And when you talk about exercise to folks, there's so many different observations or not observations, but reasons why not to do it. These people talking about, women said, well, I don't want to bulk up,
Is there any data to support that?
Mhm.
No.
No. Right?
Yeah.
I interviewed last year a young lady who was a professional bodybuilder.
Yes.
And one of the things that struck me was that she was saying, like, how hard it is.
How many years it took her?
It took her to get to the size. She was like, you're not going to get big by lifting weights and exercising, right? So when you have all this world of things that you can do, it seems like we're converging to the place where weight training is extremely important.
Thank God, because I had a muscle stem cell lab since 2000, and I have been shouting from the mountaintops since that time. But the public was not ready. We were still in marathon mode. We were still in aerobics are queen mode, right? And you know what? Thank goodness people moved. Jane Fonda and Richard Simmons got people off the couch. Thank goodness. But the fact of the matter is, I always say to people, if there's one thing, if you have 1 hour a day and no more time, you are going to spend it lifting weights, and not mamby-pamby pink weights for 20 reps at a time. You are going to put down that nonsense. You are going to pick up heavy weights and do fewer reps. Here's why. In our 40s, when our hormones change, we no longer have the amazing anabolic stimulus, which is building stimulus, that we get with great levels of estrogen and testosterone. Whether you're men or women, we both have both hormones. Therefore, we must provide a mechanical stimulus that's high enough to stimulate the muscle protein synthesis pathways, which is an mTOR pathway. So you got to work harder. Are you going to get hurt? Hopefully not. It could happen, but choose your pain. Is it a lot of work? Yes, it is, but choose your pain. It is a lot of work to go to the doctor's office 3 days a week when you're an old person, right? So if you have 1 hour a day, spend it lifting weights, because not only is muscle help you be mobile or help your posture, muscle and bone are endocrine organs, right? So every time a muscle contracts, it causes the either release or the transcription of proteins that work in nearly every organ system. What people think is that bones are just structural to hold up a quivering mass of muscle, right? Actually, bones are an endocrine organ and either cause the transcription of proteins or release proteins that act everywhere from our brain to stimulate the production of neurotrophs, all the way from men to produce testosterone. So in strengthening our muscles, building muscle and building better bone, it's a whole body activity, not just a bicep activity, right? So we must lift heavy, number one. Number two, it's not rocket science, people. That's why I'm going to give you 3 points. You wanted me to give you 3 points. It's build better muscle and build better bone. Number two, get off the high intensity merry-go-round. It is very popular right now to do high intensity interval training, which is fine. But what I see, because my office is in a gym and my office windows open up onto a football field, I see high intensity interval training 7 days a week, and every 3 weeks the same people are in my office with injuries, because here's how it goes. The middle high intensity interval training, 65 to 80% of your maximum effort, is not low enough effort that you're working in your most efficient metabolic, which is zone 2 base training, which is what pro athletes do. You need to do that 80% of the time. It's also not high enough working at the highest aspects of your output to really stimulate metabolism, which you should be doing 20% of the time. Many people, because they haven't been taught, spend most of their time in the middle, which ends up being not good enough to stimulate metabolism and not low enough to prevent getting injured. And so it's garbage. And so what I would like to see people do is 80-20. And in doing so, you decrease the pain, because base training is not hard. Zone 2 at 130 beats per minute, which is what mine is not so daunting. 7 days a week, gutting it out, throwing shit around on the football field is hard. Sorry, I'm a surgeon and I swear a little bit. It's a polite crowd. So that's number 2. Number 3, we need to eat an anti-inflammatory diet, which means we eliminate simple sugars. I'm sorry. In Lake Nona, I'm going to tell you truthfully, and I love you. I moved here to be with you. That is the hardest thing. People will do almost anything I ask them to do, except give up sugar, simple sugar, added sugar, read the back of packages to see how much sugar is added to the processed food. And this makes me very unpopular. Give up the bottle of wine that people tend to like to drink for dinner here, for various sugar and type 2 carcinogenic reasons. But if we do those 3 categories, lift heavy, 80-20 cardio, and focus on green leafy vegetables and high protein, that will take us a long way. It doesn't have to be that complicated, because that's simple. It's a simple lifestyle, actually.
Let me add to that, because I think you can give us even more insight on that, because when you say that, people say, oh, well, I don't have time.
Do you not have time?
Yeah, well, I mean, we both know Deepak, when he was living here. Deepak told me one time that he used to say, or still says to people, meditation is good for you. And 10 minutes a day, people will say, I don't have 10 minutes. So you don't have 10 minutes, then you need 20 minutes a day.
Good for him. That hyped up.
Then you
Yeah.
need a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think there's, I don't think, I actually know there's a serious misconception of the amount of time
Right.
you spend a week
Yeah.
moving
Yeah.
intentionally, lifting the weights and so forth, to get the positive benefits. It's not hours and hours.
It isn't. It isn't.
What is your recommendation for people to get started when it comes to lifting and moving?
Well, if people are doing absolutely nothing, which happens, I get it. I mean, there's no judgment. You're busy people. We're all busy people. I mean, I often say to people, listen, I get it. I'm the mother of a blended family of 6 children and 2 grandchildren. 2 old people live with me and 2 dogs. I get busy, right? I'm a surgeon. I get it. That being said, you can really squeeze in what you need to do in about 45 minutes. And for people with small children, I believe you can still get a lot done because what you do, they will do. If you bring them to a place where they see you working out, they too will be foam rolling on the floor. I mean, at least our kids did, and I see it in the gym all the time. Parents have such a profound influence on the behavior of your children. We don't have to separate them from this parts of our lives. In fact, we'll build those habits in them as if it's normal, right? So I feel like we don't have to separate. But if we just need 45 minutes to ourselves, lots of gyms, thankfully, including the Performance Club, have a fun playroom where the kids would rather be anyway. That's right.
So let's go back to the nutrition part, right? Because one of the things that I found fascinating in the study I read a few years back was that you mentioned we need to have the leafy greens, we
Yeah.
need to have eliminate sugar, refined sugar. The alcohol, of course, is a big one because there's a campaign to make us drink it. We all love it, but we know the negative effects. And of course, high quality protein. But it matters in which order you actually consume that. We should be consuming first the fibrous.
Have you read The Glucose Goddess? Is that who you've read?
No.
That's who put that out. There's a book called The Glucose Goddess, and I tend to like what she says. There's some people would say it's hogwash, but I don't know. I implement that with people who I consult with and take care of. So what you're talking about is number one, we're not going to eat refined sugar. We're not adding white sugar. We're reading packages. But it doesn't mean we're eliminating carbs. Carbs are not evil. Simple carbs will kill us, but fiber is so good for our microbiome, right? So we should be taking in the majority of our carbs as fiber. So that's number one. Number two, high quality protein. So what does that mean? So you can get protein from anything, but when we say high quality, we're looking at the content of one of the branched chain amino acids called leucine. It is one of the 9 essential amino acids that we don't make ourselves. We must get it from our foods. Leucine is considered one of the most important because it is what stimulates muscle protein synthesis the best. So where do we get it? What is the definition of high quality protein? We get the most leucine from whey, so from milk, right? Where's the highest source of leucine in all of nature? Mother's milk. So if nature thinks that it's that important to put it highest in mother's milk, there's something to that. So there's about 12% leucine in whey and mother's milk. Then in meat sources, there's about 8 to 10%. So any meat, any animal meat. But if you don't eat meat, you don't have to eat meat. You just have to eat a lot more plants, right? Beans and legumes. And because look at bulls. A bull, a cattle bull, is all muscle and all they eat is vegetables, grass. So you just have to eat a huge volume. There's 4 to 6% leucine in some of those. So you can get them from anything, but you must get them. You must get it, right? Because that's the only way you'll build muscle and build brain and that kind of thing. But the order. So the reason the order matters is because we must do everything possible not to allow our blood sugar to spike every time we eat. So when we eat a carb, They're so easily digested by our small intestines that it will immediately be digested. All the glucose will be added to our blood, and we will get a huge spike. Now, the job of insulin is to push the glucose from the bloodstream into muscle so that the mitochondria, which are the little powerhouses in our bodies, which live in the basement membranes of muscle, can then convert it to energy in the form of something called ATP. But here's the deal. Mitochondria work at a steady state. They cannot be hurried. Metabolism is at one speed. It doesn't matter if you have 100,000 units of glucose or 10. It's going to do its thing. So what happens if we eat a high carb first, our blood sugar goes up over 200, God forbid, our insulin's working so hard to get it pushed into the muscle, and the mitochondria's saturated. You're going to store that somewhere, and it's going to be stored in your peripheral fat, or even worse, in your visceral fat, right? So how do we prevent the spike in glucose? Well, number one, we eat high protein at every meal, 30 grams-ish. But within a meal of green leafy vegetables, high quality protein, starch, how do we eat them? Well, if we want to slow down the glucose spikes, we first eat the green leafy vegetables. So unlike Europeans who eat their salads last, Americans are right. We eat them first. No, I'm just kidding. Not really. But we must eat our greens first. Whether it's breakfast, First Watch is now used to me asking for a side salad with my breakfast. You eat green leafy first. It goes into your stomach. It forms a net. It is very hard to digest plants. That's why cows have 4 stomachs. It is very hard to digest. It sits there. On top of that, you then eat your protein, because then it will sit there and digest slowly. And then finally, you put your carbs on top, because by the time your carbs actually make it to your small intestine, it's a very slow metabolism. That includes your fruits. People ask me all the time, okay, I get the white sugar thing, but how about honey or agave? Or listen, where do we get white sugar? Beets and sugar cane. They're plants. It's the same no matter what source of sugar, right? So with this, fruits, we are never again in our entire lives going to drink juice. Juice is 500 calories of pure sugar, and it's going to spike you like this. If you want fruit, we're going to eat the whole fruit, so we get the fiber, and we're going to eat it as dessert. I disagree with Jesse Itzler, who I think is just great, but he only eats fruits before 2 p.m. Well, okay, so he may have a better metabolism than the average bear, because we can't be spiking our blood sugar like that, right? So, and in doing that, I know this is true because for an entire year, I just happened to not have one on. I wore a continuous glucose monitor, not because I'm diabetic, but because I'm a data-aholic. And I wanted to understand if this was true. I read this book and I'm like, really? It's true. And from understanding my data, I know that I am incredibly sensitive to carbs. I know that my blood sugar spikes when I'm in surgery because of the cortisol of the stress that I'm under, right? And so it's just interesting to observe your own data. If you don't listen to yourself, you don't really know what's going on.
And that's fascinating because we seem to forget our beginnings. I mean, food is important because the brain needs glucose. But our evolutionary path was not the way that it is today. We go back, in time, before the agricultural revolution, 13, 14, 15,000 years ago, like what you've talked to, getting food was a very important mistake thing because they're in season,
Oh,
the finding, right? Now we have access to everything.
we're in abundance. We live in abundance.
Us. It's like one of my doctor friends says we're overfed, we're under-exercised, we're overstressed. Right? And the idea is just to get us out of that. But I wanted to
Can I say something about the brain real quick? And don't lose your thought. But I just want to point out that yes, our brain's only fuel is glucose. It's only fuel. But I don't want you to think that you have to go eat sugar to get it or even fruits to get it, because there are essential fatty acids. Those you must get from your food because you can't make them, right? There are essential proteins that you must, amino acids that you must get from your food because you can't make them. There is no essential glucose because your body can make fuel from fat and protein. So I don't want you believing you have to eat sugar just to get enough fuel for your body. Your body will make it out of fat and protein. I just needed to get that in there. There's no essential sugar.
No, I appreciate that. It actually leads into what I want to say. One of the reasons why I admire you, when we were talking before the podcast, I was sharing with you about my father as an MD and retired, and he was very passionate about understanding the entirety of the human. You know, his consultations were always start. He had rules that I want you to tell me why you're here. I am going to ask you a whole bunch of questions, and you ask them, what did you eat this morning? How was your home life? How was work? How are the kids? You just go through this and spend what today may seem like an unacceptable amount of time, because at the end of the day, you will have this patience. I get it. And then only after he understood the entirety of what that person, as much as he could, then he would say, okay, so why are you here? Let's talk about that. And some percentage of the time that wasn't single digits, he wouldn't prescribe it anymore. You need to stop smoking. Or you need to, which people don't want to hear. So I appreciate your approach of looking at the entire human, because it starts with what we eat, it starts with how we move, because that regulates our hormones, we regulate our moods, which regulate, you know, how much brain fog we have. And we don't get really good results when we go with this reductionist approach to observing ourselves, just by observing parts of ourselves. At least I feel better when I'm observing the entirety of myself. You agree with that? I'll
give you an example. I mean, I'm fortunate that lots of Lake Nonians trust me with their musculoskeletal care. And to your point, when people come in, whether or not they're going to have surgery, if someone comes into me with needing surgery and I need to optimize them for that so that they heal better. So we talk about how much protein are they having. I tell them how to eat for the 6 weeks before. If there's any doubt in my mind, we talk about all the ways to optimize for surgery. But if you come in with arthritis, which doesn't usually need surgery, before I talk about any medical intervention, whether it's an anti-inflammatory or whether it's a platelet-rich plasma, which is using your own biologics to take care of arthritis, we're talking about you must build muscle mass in your butt, core, and hips to support your knees, for instance. We must eliminate simple sugar so that we are not so highly inflamed that we're on fire inside and hurting ourselves more. So we just go through all the lifestyle things, because if I were just interested in sticking a needle in your knee and giving you some steroids, that doesn't honor you as a person, and that doesn't honor me as a highly educated whole person doctor, right? It's good for nobody. So I appreciate your father's approach, because it certainly is my approach. It's not the most insurance company efficient way to practice, but it is the way people deserve to be treated, and it's the way I choose to treat people.
You mentioned therapy, stem cells.
Yeah.
It seems like everyone's talking about it. And I, for one, feel like it's a great thing that we're getting we're going in that direction, but there's a lot of confusion on what works, what doesn't work, what's real, what's not real. Can you shed some light on that?
I can, and I want to tell you the point of view that I come from. I don't come to what I'm about to say to you as a casual observation. I come to my point of view from having been at the beginning of muscle stem cell work. I was in a lab in 1999 when we were first starting to harvest mesenchymal stem cells from the pelvis, or muscle-derived stem cells, which we now know as satellite stem cells from muscle. At the very beginning, when we were just figuring out what they could do if I transduced them with a gene that would make them produce bone morphogenic protein, for instance, one of the many things we did. And then applying that technology first in in mice with no immune system, then to my specific work at that time was challenging an intact immune system and then moved to human, right? So I come from the perspective of having been there and believing that the human body is capable of healing itself and that we just don't know how to do it yet. We are now in 2024 and we started this in earnest in the 1999, right? We have made progress, but we're not there yet. So when I apply platelet-rich plasma, which I'll explain, or adipose matrix, or mesenchymal stem cells, most of us who are doing it in a responsible way recognize that we do not yet know the optimum dose. We do not know from a mixed sample of blood and stem cells we get from the pelvis exactly what we have or what cell surface markers we need and in what proportion. But I can tell you for sure that if you get stem cells from a clinic where they take them off the shelf from a tube, they are dead. And you don't know what you're getting, and you've just paid $10,000 for garbage. So I'm telling you to be buyer beware and find someone who's doing it in a responsible way that is doing the research behind it. So what do we know enough now to use to help people out? We know enough now about platelet-rich plasma, which in 1999, when we started, I drew my own blood in the lab because I didn't need permission from the hospital IRB. It was my own blood, for God's sake. And we spun it off and we started looking at what the platelets were full of. Well, enough studies have been done now. We know what they're full of, what growth factors. We know approximately what dose it takes. It takes at least 10 billion platelets. So you have to count the product. You can't just say, oh, I spun it a few times, I think I'm going to give it to you. Because we, the grand we, have done enough randomized control trials of dose and route and what they contain to now do meta-analysis to say you need 10 billion platelets as the minimum viable dose in one giant injection, which has even changed in the last few years. It was 5 billion over 3 injections, but now through further research. So number one, that's the platelet research, right? Number two, when it comes to stem cells, it is illegal in this country to manipulate stem cells at all. So you can draw them from the pelvis, you can purify them a little bit, and inject them in the same location. You cannot legally take them out, manipulate them somewhere in a lab, then bring them back and put them in a patient. It's illegal. The FDA is let it go for a while, but they are really pressing doctors and telling people to cease and desist. Exosomes, which is another popular word. Exosomes are just little sacs of growth factors, if you will, that are released from the cell membrane of stem cells. It's probably what we need anyway. We might need the stem cell. We just need the supernatant in the petri dish with everything the stem cells produce, right? Are illegal right now. Okay, so if you're getting those, I'm not sure how safe they are. They're illegal. The FDA has not approved them. Do I believe we will get there? Absolutely. So if you're getting a lot of hate mail from this, I think we will get there. We're just not there yet because it's first do no harm, right? Because do you know what cancer is? Cancer is a stem cell gone bad that has gotten out of control. So God forbid we don't know what we're doing and give people the potential to do harm. So do I believe that the human body is capable of healing itself? Yes, I do. Do I think that we will get there? Yes, I do. I mean, actually, some fascinating research is being done in the Bahamas. Under research conditions, to elucidate some of this. Do I think we're there yet? No, I do not. But the marketing got ahead of the science. And so that's why you see all these mom and pop shops, shingles on the door, advertising that you can get all these biologics out of a jar. Use the brain you've been given. We were talking about this earlier, but your new venture. Question the reality. Do not be a sheep being led astray by some slick marketing ploy.
But the good news, right, is that as we're learning all of this, there are things that, correct me if I'm keep me honest here, but there are things that we believe that people won't going to believe. Like I believe when I left engineering and came into this world that the body will heal if it's in an environment that is conducive for that healing, right? But now we know in the case of stem cells, right, that if we are sedentary, a sedentary lifestyle has a negative effect on them. And that can be changed just by changing lifestyle.
So, do you want me to tell you about an experiment we did? And
Please.
yes, to this point. So, we were evaluating the role of exercise on rejuvenating stem cells. So, it is not without cause that we say mobility is the fountain of youth. So, we had these little old lady mice. These were the pilot studies that we now use for humans. We repeated them. So number one, I want to say that no clinician like myself, I'm a clinical scientist, does their best work without partnership with a PhD. So I have been so fortunate in my career to be partnered with brilliant PhDs who are world leaders in their field. So I just want to give credit where credit's due. So I had this lab with Dr. Fabrizia Ambrosio, who is a physical therapy PhD, brilliant. It's some of the most seminal work in this field. So we had these little old lady mice in our lab. Our lab was called the Control Lab, go figure, clinical research and translation lab. And they were old mice are 2 years old. And they're just done. They're sitting back in their little cages waiting for me to dump some mice food in there. But I used one of my first grants to buy a couple mouse treadmills. Do you know how much mouse treadmills cost? You think these gym equipment we have in LMPC are expensive. $30,000. I know, for a mouse treadmill anyway. We bought them. It used up a chunk of my grant. And we sampled these old gals. We call them satellite cells now. We called them muscle-derived stem cells at the time. They're stem cells. Healthy stem cells are round like a grape. These stem cells were so old, they were all spindly like a tree branch. They were no longer dividing. They were no longer churning out growth factor, and they had turned on the genes for death. Death in the body is an active process. You don't just die. You turn on the genes to die, and these stem cells had done that. So then we took these old girls and we put them on these $30,000 treadmills, and we wanted them to run, but they're just as lazy as we are. They had no intention of saving their own lives, but we were persuasive. And then twice a day for 2 weeks, they ran on these these treadmills. And then we resampled their stem cells. And what did we find? We found plump stem cells churning out growth factors, dividing like crazy. And if I had slides, I have little movies of these stem cells dividing, and they had turned off the genes to death. So if you want to rejuvenate your stem cells, we just need a little exercise. And so we then translated that research, repeated it in humans, and used it as a basis for prehab for surgery. So if I can get some exercise into some people's thighs that are going to undergo joint replacement, for instance, they're going to be in better shape to heal afterwards because their stem cells are jacked up.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I could talk with you forever, but I want to give you the opportunity to. Usually, we have let the crowd ask any questions that they may have. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Wright? Don't be shy. Do we have a microphone available?
I'll be passing it around.
Thank you.
Are we on? Okay. So my question is related to cortisol levels, inflammation, and exercise. And
Oh, only that.
well, and how there's a relationship between the two.
Mhm.
Can exercise can help decrease the
Sure. Yes.
so perfect.
Yes.
So if you are in what is the optimum state of inflammation and cortisol levels to begin an exercise routine? And is there work that needs to be done ahead of time to get to that? Like, do you exercise a little bit to get to where you're ready to exercise? The 80% that you were talking about. Just wanting to know more about that relationship.
So I first want to say that inflammation and cortisol are normal, are critical in our bodies, right? So our goal is never to eliminate inflammation because it's how we heal. You sprain your ankle, it gets hot, it gets red, it gets swollen. Right. Right. So I just wanted to make that distinction. And cortisol is the body's natural response to stress, and we need it because you can go into cortisol crisis and in the hospital, if your adrenals shut down and you're not making cortisol, we have to give it to you so that you don't die. So just that platform. So I think I am not aware of any research that tells us that to start exercising, you must have a cortisol level between this and such, or you must be anti-inflamed to the point where your CRP is between these numbers. What we can measure is, or what we can see in terms of injury or chronic fatigue is, for instance, high intensity interval training 7 days a week without recovery. I mean, this is a long answer, but the best way to understand if you're ready for your next bout of exercise is to, if you want to be scientific about it, is to look at your recovery. Is your heart rate variability back down to being wide, or is your heart rate variability very narrow because you're so stressed your heart is just not responding as well? And there's lots of wearables now that do it. Whoop and Aura do it, where you can really look at your recovery, which then is the true measure if you're ready to hit it hard the next day, or whether we should take an easy day. We should take another zone 2 day instead of adding sprint intervals at the end of it. And that's how we train our pro athletes. We don't let them go hard again the very next day if they don't show recovery via heart rate variability, resting heart rate, that kind of thing. That's just how we do it with pro athletes, not with blood.
Any other? Please.
I had gone to a health clinic and to prepare for that, I had to answer well over 100 questions, personal questions, as well as a couple, maybe 2 or 3 panels of blood work prior to my meeting with the doctors. And once there, it was like a 3-hour session. So they really did intensive questions going down through all of them, and was offered certain supplements according to my answers and the blood work produced. So getting on this kind of, it's not a contraption, but you hold on tight to it and get your muscles in your arm.
Your body composition. Mm-hmm.
Vision. So how accurate is that? Because I'm 72 and I feel younger. But they said my metabolic health was 55 years old. So does that mean the inside of my body, according with my triglycerides, my cholesterol, my waist circumference, and blood sugar, and blood pressure, is really good at this point of my life? I don't want to be fooled.
Well, okay, that's a lot to unpack. So I think a wonderful way to figure out what's going on inside is body composition. What you're talking about is a machine called an in-body, which uses electrical impedance to figure out percentage body fat, lean muscle mass, water content. And it's a marvelous guide. The more expensive the machine, the more accurate the data, right? So if you have the low level machine, it's less accurate. The standard, the gold standard is a DEXA scan, which you can buy for $99 without a prescription. And I encourage all of my patients to go do that. And I like people to know their body composition, because otherwise, how are we going to know if we're building muscle? Because if we're losing weight, if we're just looking at a scale, every pound you lose, half of that is muscle, half of that is fat, and that's not the goal, right? So we're not talking about losing weight. We're talking about recomposing our bodies. Body composition is good for that. It's amazing that they drew that many biomarkers for you. It's amazing that they spent 3 hours for you. There are many, we can name 10 of them, biologic clocks on the market right now. Some of them better than others, some of them based on goodish science, some of them based on opinion. At this point, most of us agree in the longevity space that they are okay for trends, but they tell you nothing. So it said you're 55. I don't even know what that means, because I have 55-year-olds who are in terrible metabolic health. So do you want to be like that 55-year-old? Metabolic clocks right now are interesting, but they're toys. They don't truly measure physiology. But can you track that this biologic clock says that today you're 10 years younger than your chronologic age, and after all these lifestyle changes you make, you're now 12 years younger? If you use the same biologic clock, you may be able to track a trend. But to say that you're truly whatever number it says, I don't have any basis, and neither does anybody else, to truly say that.
Well, I was so proud.
Well, you should have been. And it's not meant to be discouraging. It's just meant to be truthful.
It gave me more encouragement to keep on going.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You have time for one more question?
So my question is, obviously you should work out your entire body.
Yep.
Recently, I heard that your quads, like strength and
Did you hear that from Simon Sinek?
I don't.
He's been all over. I'm like, Simon, that's not your gig. I mean, you're the why guy. Why are you talking about thighs?
My husband's big on like all the reading all that stuff. And then
Yeah.
he introduced it to me, and he was like, and he just made that comment that the development strength of your quads is the key to longevity. So I was just curious if there was any truth to the
Well, let's walk that back, right? And say, well,
work out my quads then.
why couldn't that be true? I've already told you that we are designed with the biggest muscle groups below our belly button. I've already told you that we need to build as much lean muscle mass as we can. Well, if the biggest muscles are below our belly button and we need as much of that as possible, okay, take the quads. Who cares? Why not the glute max, right? That's really the biggest muscle back there. But the point being, I don't disagree with the point of we just need to build as much muscle as we can. But in the min-max principle, okay, if you're going to choose to lift leg days, never skip a leg day, skip your biceps. It's never going to be as big as your vastus medialis, for instance.
I see all your videos, and you do a lot of legs.
I do a lot of total body. I do push, pull, upper and lower. So, yeah.
Well, I wanted to be respectful of your time.
Well, this has been fun. Thank you. Yeah.
I wanted to give you the opportunity to close. I always try to close with some action.
Mm-hmm.
Community here, and I'm very big on do better. And that's what we're talking about. Before we started the podcast, that I'm very passionate about we taking ownership of our well-being, our mental well-being, our spiritual well-being, our physical well-being, and if we want to live a better life, we have to feel better, and to feel better, we have to do better things. So if you were to leave the audience, those who are here and those who are online, with 3 things, thoughts on how to do better, bring it up. It's okay. We've talked a lot about some.
We have.
Right, but we're gonna put it in the package and put a bow in it. What would you leave the audience here as an action item?
So 3 action items. Number 1 is Sometimes people arrive in midlife hearing that it's normal. That's just the way it is. Give up. Lots of doctors tell patients, you're just getting old. What do you want to do that for anyway? There is never an age or skill level when your body will not respond to the strategic stress you place upon it. We are designed to move. And if we invest in ourselves in the ways we've talked about, your body will respond. So everything we've talked about, number one, pivot from a mindset that youth was the best time of our lives. Youth was easy, but today is the best time because we're wiser, we're smarter. Hopefully we're out of our parents' house, and if not soon, you know what I mean. So number one, pivot. We got to pivot our mindset away from the attitude that aging means decrepitude. Number two, we haven't talked about this a lot tonight, particularly from the women, but also for the men. Hormones, being estradiol, testosterone, progesterone, are the elixirs of longevity, particularly for women. Replacing your hormones and making the active decision whether or not you are going to do hormone replacement therapy once you are perimenopausal and menopausal is the elixir of life. All-cause mortality decreases when you make the decision. Now, here's the deal. You are sentient beings. You have agency. You get to make the decision, but you must make the decision surrounded by science and not by fear. Though WHI and the scourge of a generation being told that estrogen will kill you has been walked back, and that data has been disproved. So if you're looking for the fountain of youth, it is building muscle and it is replacing your hormones. And I am not afraid to take the battering that I'm going to get for saying that because the data is so clear. Number three, here's the deal. I know you're busy. I'm busy. You're busy. But until you decide that you are worth the daily investment in your health, none of it matters.
That pain of discipline versus the pain of regret.
That's right.
Dr. Wright, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you.
For everyone here that know, we do have some beverages and snacks, and we want to come up and introduce yourself. Dr. Wright, please do so. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.